love your backstory. I love what's going on. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. So before we get into your good work, I want to know this. It, 5 years ago, this pandemic was raging. So many things were changing. How did you ultimately get through that time period, and how has it influenced the way that you do things today in 2025?
Oh, it changed my whole life for sure because I ran a large office. I had 8 therapists in there. I had a school of mystical philosophy in which I taught every night. It was a very, very different life. I was coming out of a divorce right when the pandemic started. But aside from that, I had to close the office. I closed the school and eventually got a job. I used to be an engineer, so I got a job as an engineer because I had to make a living, couldn't keep the office open. And I had always worked online, but just a little bit. I didn't really enjoy it as much. So I preferred to see people in person at the office. When the pandemic started, I started seeing people online a little bit. It was kind of a new thing back then. I didn't really enjoy it that much. So ended up getting a job as an engineer, got a couple promotions, and I was working at a body armor company. And the war started, the war in Ukraine, and they made me chief of engineering, chief of manufacturing. I kept getting promotions, and it was nice. I was there for a couple of years, but I wanted to come back to therapy, so that's what I did. When I came back to therapy, the world was different. First of all, I had been at the hospital for many days. I got COVID. I had a near-death experience. The doctor didn't think I was going to make it. It was one of those stories.
Yeah.
And so when I came back from engineering back to therapy, it was a different world. Getting clients was different. The whole world was different. Everybody became a coach. I mean, the world changed quite a bit, and it's been an interesting thing to adapt to this new world. But I'm learning.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do as a hypnotherapist and author of Spiritual Guide. If I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year olds at career day, and one of the kids is curious and is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
I help people find themselves. I help people change their minds about themselves so they can live a more authentic and happy life. The word authentic may not make too much sense for a 12-year-old, but I think we all have a sense of this idea of joy and flow, what we sometimes call happiness. When you're in joy, when you are in flow, when your life is working out for you and you're feeling good about your life. And when that's not happening, to a certain extent, it's because we're not living our lives. And I help people find themselves, live their own lives, and so they can be themselves. And that requires a changing the mind. And that's what I do. I help them change their minds.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. When you were 12 years old, what was your dream job?
I wanted to be an engineer, actually.
Okay.
I loved engineering. It was always a dream of mine. I never had a struggle in the professional area of my life. All of my struggles have been with relationships, a couple of divorces, relationships have been tough for me, but I never really struggled with career or choices of career. I wanted to be an engineer. I went to school, became an engineer, worked as a design engineer, eventually got a master's and PhD, worked as a scientist. I loved working at the lab. I published papers. I loved all of that. But in parallel to all of that, I had a life in mystical philosophy as a hobby. And one day, I decided to kind of jump ship and work in hypnotherapy and teaching and philosophy. And I kind of jumped a little bit. But I've always loved engineering, so much so that when the pandemic started, the best way you could make a living was to go back and get a job as an engineer. And I loved it. I enjoyed every minute of it. But I think I love therapy more at this stage of my life. So I came back to therapy.
So take me back to where you were born and raised. What were these foundational elements of therapy, engineering, spirituality? How did all of these get planted and harvested to become who you are today?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is something that we talk a lot about in therapy, and I'm no exception to the rule, right? So I grew up in a conflictive home. My parents fought a lot. My mom had a lot of turmoil, and so that was difficult. No surprise, I've had trouble in my relationships. But my father was a hardworking man, a professional, worked for a large company. and always made a good living, so I kind of did that as well. um, but from a very young age, I wanted to understand life. And I remember one of my favorite hobbies as a kid was to interview couples whom I considered to be happy. I realized that my parents were not, but I realized that other people, other couples were happy. So I would ask them questions. What is it like to live your life? What is it like? How come you guys seem so happy? And that became a habit of mine. I loved asking questions. And it wasn't until after my doctoral years, I worked at university, that I realized that, dude, I can actually do this, and people respond well to it. So I started doing therapy, which is really the art of asking the right questions at the right time. And then, of course, the element of hypnosis comes in the sense that we address the unconscious or the subconscious portion of the conflict. And I learned how to do that. And some of my teachers thought I was able to do that well and encouraged me to explore that further. Initially, I did it as a hobby. A few people would ask me for help, and I would help them out. But eventually, it became obvious that I was enjoying that more than working at the lab at a university. So I started doing this full time back in 1996. That was a few years ago.
Yeah. So, the thing about, from my perspective of the therapeutic arts, is that it seems like there's a part of it that's a one-way avenue. People are coming to you for help, but you ultimately are affected. It's a part of a two-way communication. What have you learned about yourself throughout all these years of helping people therapeutically get to better places? Has that helped you evolve to a different, better places in your life?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. You asked a couple of questions there.
Yeah.
The first question was, what have I learned? One thing I've learned is I'm no better than anybody else. And nowadays, I tell my clients up front, first session, look, I'm no better than you. My life is a mess, to the board, whatever, right? I mean, it's no better than you. Life is difficult, and we all struggle in different areas, right? So I think I can help you. I'm going to work with you, but don't think that I'm any better than you. That's one of the things that I've learned. I think that when we're younger, we have a different view on ourselves. I think that we tend to think of ourselves as perhaps better than we actually are. But then life has a way of showing us reality, right? I mean, I've done some things well and some things not very well at all. So I think reality is adjusted there. But the one way, and I always say this. I say this in my prayers. I say this in my books. I say this all over the place. I teach my daughters to pray that way. I always thank the clients, and I call them my true teachers, my true teachers. And I say that because I learned so much from them. In other words, when a person has a problem and we explore the origins or the cause of the problem from the perspective of the subconscious mind, I learn about that relationship between cause and effect. Well, this happened, therefore, this was the consequence. And I think that learning that way has saved me some time. Were it not for my 44 plus thousand sessions of therapy, I think my life would be worse today. I think I've learned quite a bit from the clients. It isn't that I'm asking them questions for my benefit, but you can't help but to learn. Wow, life actually is like that. So I do think that my life is better as a result of this. Absolutely.
So, speaking of spirituality, have you had like a real, you mentioned a near-death experience. Would you say that you've had a spiritual awakening, a moment that made you really feel the creator, made you feel something in a very spiritual way that's affected the rest of your life?
Quite a few of those experiences, but I want to preface it by saying that the way we imagine spiritual experiences to be, perhaps we've seen them in movies. I mean, if a person has had a number of those experiences, they're familiar with them. I don't have to explain. But if a person is seeking those experiences, I want to say that my heart goes out to you because, like you, most of my life, I imagined those experiences to be something that they're not. And as a result, they didn't happen for me for a long time until I kind of realized that I was sort of expecting a fantasy, my own fantasy. That doesn't exist. The first spiritual experience that I had was in Costa Rica. I was sleeping at a small motel, a little hotel beachside, and I couldn't sleep one night. and I went out to the beach. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I talk about this in one of my books, and it was a profound spiritual experience, but it's not like God showed up and said, "Oh, Flavio, you're awesome." No, it wasn't like that. It was like the Holy Spirit talking to me and saying, "Dude, you got a lot of work to do. You're not that good." In other words, the experience wasn't the way that I imagined. It was convicting me of how much work I had to do. Particularly, I had a problem with verbal offenses. I would be very sharp with my words. And ironically, I worked healing people with words, but I was also very tough with my words, and I hurt a lot of people. And that night in Costa Rica, I was able to remember experiences going back probably 600 years. I mean, all kinds of experiences that showed me, dude, you've been hurtful, and you cannot continue being that way. So my very first strong and real spiritual experience was one in which I was aware of how bad I have been. And that was the biggest blessing I've ever received, because if it were not for that experience, I probably would have continued being the same rude person that I was.
So when you look back on your life and everything that you've evolved to at this point, who's been that hero, that inspirational force for you?
I've had a few, when I had my first job as an engineer, I had just graduated at 23. I got a job. I worked for about a year. When I left that company, I wanted to go back to graduate school. I was about 23, 24 years of age. I decided to embark on the mystical path for real. And as life would have it, I met what I consider to be an authentic spiritual teacher, somebody here locally in Miami. And I was with him for about 20 years until he died. I think that he was a big hero of mine for many years because I learned so much and he initiated me in all of these mysteries. And in parallel to that, I have somewhat of a religious inclination as well. I happen to be a part-time pastor. I do that as a hobby. I enjoy marrying people, that kind of thing, right? So at the time, I met a nun, a Catholic nun, who lived at a convent, and she took on a liking for me, I suppose, kind of adopted me as her spiritual son, as she would say. And for about 3 or 4 years, I took classes with her twice a week, every single week. And she taught me mysteries, the church and God, and things that you don't quite hear in church on a Sunday morning. And I was there for about 4 years, I believe, and it was a wonderful period of my life. I do talk about her in the book as well. Both of those people passed on, but they became sort of my pseudo parents. I had a male teacher at night in a mystical school, and I had this Catholic nun in the morning who taught me a different side of life. She taught me how gracious and loving God is, and a whole different type of teaching. The school at night was very strict. It was one of those traditional mystical schools that is based on tradition and discipline and order, right? But this nun taught me that God is all love, So I had both of those energies within me. And I would say that those two people, more than anyone else, influenced me quite a bit. Aside from that, I was fortunate. I had wonderful professors in college, in medical school. I mean, wonderful people. And really, I cannot fail to mention my parents. I honor my parents. I had a difficult childhood, but nowadays I realize that had it not been for the way my parents were, I wouldn't be the man I am today. So I honor them very deeply.
So I got a question about hypnosis. It tends to be something that's misconstrued in movies and media, and it's a really powerful way for people to get over habits and to kind of rewire things. From a biological standpoint, how does it work? How is this method so effective at really quickly getting people to a better place or giving up habits or kind of rewiring themselves?
Yeah, it's interesting because you use the word rewiring, and it's a good word because the way our understanding of how the brain works from the neurosciences has to do with connections among brain cells. We call those connections synapses, and those brain cells are called neurons. And so the brain isn't just a collection of neurons or a bunch of cells. the connections among those cells makes up, from a biological perspective, who we are. So this thing that we call learning, for instance, is nothing more than, from a biological point of view, a reconnection of those brain cells. In other words, one synapse may be connected, this brain cell to that brain cell, but if I remove that connection and now connect it to this brain cell, the outcome of a stimulus might change completely. So learning, so there's this idea of rewiring, right? Changing synaptic connections. So where does hypnosis come in? If it's a biological process, you would think that the only way to change the person is by changing brain biology, which means that we can change the brain physically, say radiation or magnetism. There are such therapies, transcranial magnetic therapy, for instance. You can put a powerful magnet and you can relieve depression, as an example. That's a physical intervention. But more commonly in our culture, you have the chemical interventions, right? So it can give a person psychotropic medication, serotonin and SSRI, I mean, different kinds of medications, which will change brain chemistry. And by changing chemistry, we're going to change the way those synapses connect. The intensity of those connections will change. And as a result, behavior and emotions might change. All of that is the biological model, which has been validated to some extent, but it has also been invalidated to some extent. And those are the examples in which a person is refractory, as we call it in medicine, meaning they don't respond well to medication and they don't respond well to physical interventions. They're still depressed, they're still anxious, even though they're trying medications and different kinds of medications. So something else is going on there. Well, it turns out that those synaptic connections, those brain cell connections, are heavily affected by emotions as well, but not the emotions that you and I think of, like, oh, I'm sad today, oh, I'm happy today. Not those surface level emotions, the deep rooted emotions that we're typically not aware of, hence the term subconscious. Because the reason why this is so important is because those subconscious emotions are heavily influenced by what we call decrees or decisions that we make ourselves about ourselves during the period of our lives when we're very young. We call this the pre-verbal stage, before you can really use language effectively. As an adult today, if somebody does something mean to you, you're quite capable of saying, listen, don't do that anymore. I don't like this. If you do that, I'll do this. In other words, you're capable of using language today to protect yourself and to get what you want, or at least to try to get what you want. But as a pre-verbal infant, as a baby, you don't have that ability. In other words, you take in what's dished out to you and you cannot explain yourself. That's why we cry so much as a baby. We don't know what to say. We cannot say it. We don't have the use of language yet. So it's almost as if, from a mystical point of view, language is internal. Since I cannot express it out, I speak within, type of thing. So I make agreements with myself. Oh, I get it. Mom doesn't love me, therefore no other woman loves me. Oh, I get it. Dad is not around, therefore God is abandoning me as well. That kind of thing, that kind of dialogue, that kind of decision, or that kind of decree, or we begin to make agreements with ourselves. Those agreements become the basis for synaptic connections as well. Our brains begin to behave that way. And this is why people later on begin to find experiences in life that confirm those early decrees or
Yeah.
those early biases.
That's amazing. What an amazing overview. That's exactly what I was looking for. So let me ask you this, being in the world of therapy and kind of having to dip into heavy things with clients, how do you take care of your own soul and do the best job that you can professionally each day? What is that? What does that mean for you?
I approached therapy and hypnosis from the perspective of the mystical arts. So, in the mystical arts, and not everybody does that, and by no means that's the only way to do it. It's just the way my pathway took me, right? So, I was first a student of mysticism, and I learned about hypnosis for my own personal consumption, let's put it that way, as a tool to help me meditate deeper because meditation, the very word, right? Mediation is the action of going to the center, to the medium, to the core of who I am, right? So that's the way we understand in that tradition the idea of meditation. So it's all about meditating. So the question is, in how many different ways can you meditate deeper in our tradition without using any chemicals? We believe that if you use chemicals, you're taking a shortcut, which in the long run slows you down. So the whole idea is zero substances. You got to learn to meditate on your own only and not create dependencies. That's just the way that we, in that particular tradition, learn to do it. So then hypnosis becomes a tool that can help me meditate deeper. So I got in from that angle. And to answer your question, by the time I became a practicing hypnotherapist in 1996, meditation had already become a part of my life. So each day before my work day, I would sit down for a minute or two, do my best to meditate a moment. And certainly at night, every night, I would sit down and meditate. And during the meditation, I would process and integrate and release what wasn't mine. Let's put it that way. In other words, I would kind of have a session with myself in a sense between my soul and my person, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And that was what the meditation was for me. And I did that quite regularly, like on an everyday basis. And to be honest, I never, students, I've certified over 3,000 students, and students would always ask me, don't you get affected by the sessions? Because some of the sessions can be really heavy emotionally, right? I mean, you have these depossessions, what they call exorcisms, and you can have traumas, and you can have screaming, and you can have all kinds of, when you do deep hypnosis like I have been doing. And to be honest, I never had a problem until I had a problem, which was when my second divorce occurred. Then I had a crisis. But up until then, I just took day by day and I meditated, and everything seemed very natural to me. But to answer your question, I would say in my case, meditation was the cleansing that kept me safe and sane, I guess, for many, many years.
So, of everything that you've accomplished and evolved into at this point in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Ooh, um, man, I'm proud of the people who came to see me, not because of me, because of them. I think that I'm so proud of them. They trusted not me, they trusted themselves, they trusted God, they trusted the universe, they trusted life. And each time a person calls me up and they want to tackle a problem, I'm so proud of them because when a person becomes happier, it isn't just about themselves. When a man is happier, he's a better husband, a better father. When a woman is happier, she's a better wife, a better mother, if she's married or a mother. But whatever you do in life, I'm not saying everybody's married and has children, but I'm saying whatever it is that you do as a professional, as an interviewer, as a podcaster, right? I mean, I've listened to several of your shows. By the way, Joe, I wanted to mention this to you. I love the way you interview, and I
Thank you.
love the way you allow these conversations to flow. I've heard several of them, and I really like your style. I can tell you're happy doing what you do. You can
Yeah.
tell. I can tell that.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
that's awesome. I think you do great work.
Thank you.
And this is what I have found when a person trusts the universe enough to go within themselves and solve a personal problem, they become better at whatever it is that they want to do with their lives. And I'm proud of them for that. And I keep on calling them my true teachers. And I honor deeply each and every person who comes to see me. And I have this reverence for all of them because I think they're awesome people, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you out there. All of your clients, all of your family, friends, everyone that knows you. But you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah, one thing I've noticed in your shows, you ask fantastic questions.
Thank you.
So I think of myself as a student. I think of myself as a student to this very date. I'm 59 years of age. Last year, I graduated from medical school. I think of myself as an eternal student, not just academically, like going to school type of thing, although I like doing that. I like that environment. But as a student of life, when a person comes in to see me, I think of myself as a student. I want to study them, but not from an arrogant perspective of, oh, look at me over here. I'm going to study you like you're a lab rat. Not that kind of thing. I have this humility about, okay, let me learn about why you are the way you are so that we can untangle this whole thing and make your life better. So I think of myself as a student. Interestingly enough, running a school, whatever, people would often refer to me as the teacher, sometimes the master, depending on the tradition. And I would always tell them I don't think of myself that way. I think of myself as the student. And I still think of myself as the student. When I write books, I don't think of myself as the teacher. I think that I'm a student writing an assignment, like a paper for college. And that's how I do it. That's how I approach it. So I actually like that. I think that we all have a lot to learn, all of us, and maybe not everybody. Maybe some people have already figured it all out. I do therapy myself. I have a therapist myself, and I tell my therapist, I say, I don't know, I never quite got the memo on this thing called life and marriage. I don't quite know what I'm doing. I'm still learning. And my therapist laughs a little, but that's exactly how I feel. I feel that I have a lot to learn.
So talk to me about your book,
Which one? The Frank Baylor one?
the newest book that you have.
So there are 8 books on Amazon. I have
Yep.
so Frank Baylor is an interesting book because
Yeah.
it's my only novel so far. So it's a novel it's a fictional character called Frank Baylor, who's a therapist himself, who's always believed in the idea of soulmates. Like Plato, the philosopher back in Greece, used to talk about soulmates in the context that, your souls were divided back in the beginning by Zeus, the whole mythology of soulmates. And Frank Baylor always believed in that. And he believed that his life would actually start once he met his soulmate. And he never had until the day he did. And when he met that woman, he really felt that she was his soulmate and they had this steamy relationship and everything was perfect and this and that until he started noticing that it wasn't quite the way he thought and eventually discovered that she was really an agent of darkness sent to destroy him. And so she did her black magic, whatever, trying to kill him in so many different ways, physically and magically. And Frank Baylor almost died. So he finally asks for help. He has a friend who's also on the mystical path, who understands what's going on, who knew about this woman, and says, yeah, no, we've been waiting for you to call and ask, and I'll set you up, and set him up with another teacher who guided him for a while and kind of laid out a plan for him and says, look, if you go about this pathway, maybe there's hope for you. So Frank Baylor goes through a series of experiences. Most of them had to do with trips. He would take these trips and have these initiations. And eventually he heals. But what's interesting about the book, I love the book. I don't feel that I wrote it, by the way. I feel that I was lucky enough to type it, but I don't feel I wrote it. You know, the book had over 200,000 words originally. It was written in 33 days, so it was quite downloaded, to be honest. But anyway, when I look at it, and I've read it many times, I realize that there are two different stories intertwined. They're like a DNA strand. There's the personal drama of Frank Baylor, simply trying to heal and find himself. But there's also a powerful explanation of the mystical path. These are the experiences that symbolically, one way or another, we all must go through to find TH. Now, everybody asks me, and what is TH? And I say to them, look, it's like Disney World. I can tell you all about it, but then I would be taking your, it's like telling you the end of the movie, right?
Yeah.
So I prefer not to say what TH is. It's explained in the book. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, read the book and you're going to discover your own TH. The
Yeah.
whole point of it is we all have a TH. And if you follow the story, you're going to find your own TH. And that's what that story is. It's an intertwined, it's a combination of two different parallel stories. And the people who have read it, with whom I have spoken, have loved the book. Incidentally, they gave me an award. I mean, it's very humbling, but I tell people this, and I don't mean this as false humility. I don't even feel that I deserve it because I don't feel I wrote it. I feel that I typed it, So I think it's a nice book personally.
So if anybody wants to pick up a copy of that book, your previous work, reach out, hire you, any of the good business, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, books are all on Amazon,
Sure.
right? The novel is under Frank Baler, Baler. My own book, my nonfiction books are under my name, Flavio Souza-Campos, on Amazon, two different pages. I wrote the novel separately. And my website is awesomerelations.life. Awesome Relations, one word, awesomerelations.life. And there's a ton of information there, and you can easily reach me, and I'll be happy to talk with you and see if there's any way in which I can be of service to you.
And I will put all these links in the show notes. Flavio, you're amazing, man. Thank you so much. Thank you for your energy, your story, your light. It just emanates. I've loved this.
Joe, thank you so much. And I think you're amazing as well. I love your work. And I really, really am proud and honored that we had this conversation. Thank you so much.
I feel the same way. Thank you so much.
Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.